They dragged him out of the aisle before the cabin door even closed. Not yelling, not fighting. Just the sound of rubber soles scraping carpet and a man's breath going shallow as strangers watched and did nothing. Someone whispered, "He must have done something." Someone else lifted a phone. No one asked what. The jet bridge hummed like an exposed nerve. Cold air, fluorescent light, the smell of burned coffee and disinfectant. James Carter stood there with his hands open, palms visible, his jacket half pulled off his shoulders by a security grip that was too tight for a man his age. 63 years old, grey at the temples, knees stiff when he stopped walking. He hadn't resisted. That was the part that made it worse. Inside the plane, the boarding announcement kept going, cheerful and oblivious. Families, business travelers, final call. Life moved forward without him. Security officer Luke Hanley leaned in close, breath sharp with mint and impatience. "You were told to step off voluntarily," he said, low and rehearsed. "You chose not to." James looked at him, steady, not defiant, not afraid, just tired. "I asked why," he said. His voice carried the grain of years. No one answered. Behind them, Gate Supervisor Dana Whitcomb stood rigid, tablet clutched like a shield. Late 40s, perfect posture. The kind of woman who corrected people for a living. Her eyes never met James's. She spoke to Luke instead. "We're already behind schedule. Keep him clear of the entrance." Clear, like debris. The camera in the story pulled back now. The airport expanded. High ceilings, flags hanging in still air. Veterans posters along the wall, faded but proud. A mural about freedom. James noticed it as he was turned sideways, guided away from the jet bridge toward a glass door marked "Authorized Personnel Only." He noticed because irony had always sharpened his focus. Inside that door, the sound dropped. Carpet thicker, lights dimmer. A holding corridor meant for broken strollers and lost luggage. This was where inconvenience went to disappear. Dana finally looked at him then. Her eyes moved over his face, his clothes, the worn leather briefcase he still held by habit more than need. She exhaled through her nose. "Sir," she said, measured, managerial. "You were reported as making another passenger uncomfortable." James let that sit. A lifetime of hearings and interrogations had taught him the power of silence. Luke shifted his weight. Dana continued. "Given the current security climate, we can't take chances. By pulling a senior citizen off a domestic flight," James said quietly. Luke bristled. "Watch the tone." James turned to him, slowly. His eyes were calm, but there was something behind them that made Luke's grip loosen without him realizing why. "Son," James said, not unkindly, "my tone is restraint." Dana's jaw tightened. She tapped her tablet, scrolling. "You refused a direct instruction from crew." "I asked for clarification," James said. "That's not refusal. It becomes refusal when time is critical." Time. Always time. The excuse that justified everything. A woman's heels clicked down the corridor. Margaret Collins arrived like she owned the air. Mid-50s, immaculate coat, hair pinned just so. Her carry-on rolled behind her, untouched by the chaos she'd left in her wake. She paused when she saw James. Her face didn't show fear. It showed calculation. "There he is," she said softly, as if naming a stain on fabric. "That's the man." Dana straightened. "Ma'am, we're handling it." Margaret's eyes stayed on James. She studied him the way people study storms on the horizon, deciding whether to run or fortify. For a flicker of a second, something crossed her face. Recognition. Or relief. Or both. Then it was gone. "He was staring at me," Margaret said. Her voice carried the authority of someone used to being believed. Watching my screen, leaning too close. I travel every week. I know when something isn't right. James didn't look at her. He watched Dana instead. Watched the subtle shift as responsibility slid into convenience. Dana nodded. Thank you for reporting it. Margaret stepped closer. Her perfume cut through the sterile air. I don't feel safe flying with him. The sentence landed. Heavy. Final. Luke's shoulders squared automatically. That phrase had weight. It unlocked procedures, paperwork, justifications. James felt it then. Not anger. Clarity. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was an extraction. He spoke, slow and even. Ma'am, he said, finally meeting Margaret's eyes. We've never met. Margaret smiled, thin. That's not comforting. Dana raised a hand. Sir, we're going to ask you to remain here while we document the incident. Document what? James asked, exactly. Luke answered. Non-compliance, disruptive behavior. James nodded once. Those are conclusions. Luke frowned. You don't get to define the terms. James almost smiled. Almost. Down the hall, a janitor paused his cart, watching. A young gate agent hovered by the doorway, pretending to check her phone while listening to every word. The airport, like a body, sensed tension and leaned in. Margaret shifted her bag from one arm to the other. Her fingers trembled, just slightly. James saw it. He saw the way her gaze flicked to the glass wall, checking reflections, exits, angles. This was not a woman shaken by discomfort. This was a woman managing risk. James cleared his throat. You said I was watching your screen, he said. What was on it? Margaret stiffened. That's irrelevant. Dana stepped in. Sir, this is not an interrogation. No, James agreed. It's an accusation. Luke's hand moved closer to his radio. Dana's patience thinned. We are within our authority to remove you from the flight. Remove, James repeated. Not detain. Dana hesitated. A beat too long. Margaret noticed. She leaned in, voice lower now, urgent. I have a connection, she said. If this turns into a delay, I'll escalate. There it was, the invisible lever. Dana nodded. Decision made. Sir, you'll need to surrender your phone while we process this. James looked at her. Really looked. That would be unlawful. Luke scoffed. You got a law degree now? James didn't answer him. He addressed Dana. I will comply with a lawful order, he said. I will not surrender personal property without cause. The corridor seemed to shrink. Air thickened. Somewhere above them, a plane took off, the sound like distant thunder. Dana's voice cooled. Refusal noted. Margaret exhaled, satisfied. She turned away, already done with him. Call me when it's resolved, she said. I don't want him anywhere near my flight. She walked back toward the gate, heels sharp, posture unbroken. James watched her go. He felt the old instinct stir, the one that had kept him alive through rooms smaller than this, darker than this. He knew what came next when people stopped listening. Luke stepped closer. Last chance, he said. You can make this easy. James looked down at his hands, veined, steady. He thought of the mural outside, of the words they loved to hang on walls and forget in practice. He lifted his eyes. Easy, he said softly, is rarely right. And somewhere, deep in the airport, systems older than any of them began to wake up, unaware that the quiet man they'd just dragged off a plane was about to change the shape of their day. The corridor door closed with a soft click that sounded louder than it should have. The kind of sound that told you something had shifted, that the rules had changed without being announced. James Carter felt it in his chest before his mind caught up. He stood still, briefcase at his feet, hands loose at his sides, while Dana Whitcomb walked ahead and Luke Hanley fell in behind him, close enough that James could feel the heat of his body. They led him into a narrow office with no windows and a single table bolted to the floor. 2 chairs. A security camera in the corner, its red light steady, unblinking. The air smelled faintly of dust and stale paper. A place designed to be temporary, but used too often to feel accidental. "Sit," Luke said. James did, slowly. His knees complained, a dull ache he'd learned to ignore. He placed the briefcase upright between his feet, the way he always did. Habit. Control. Dana stayed standing. She rested her tablet on the table, fingers poised as if the device might bite her. "We're documenting an incident involving passenger disturbance," she said. "This will be quick if you cooperate." James looked up at her. "You still haven't told me what I did." Dana's eyes flicked to Luke, then back. "Another passenger reported feeling unsafe." "Feeling," James repeated. "Not threatened, not harmed. Feeling." Luke leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "You don't get to cross-examine." James nodded once. "That's fine. I'm just trying to understand the standard." Dana inhaled, controlled. "The standard is compliance." There it was. Not safety, not truth. Compliance. She tapped her tablet. "Name." "You have my boarding pass." "Name," she repeated. "James Carter." Luke snorted. "Figures." James didn't look at him. Dana typed. "Age, 63. Luke raised an eyebrow. Old enough to know better. James met his gaze then. Luke flinched, just slightly. Not fear. Something closer to recognition, though he didn't know why. Dana continued. "Reason for travel. Personal." "That's not sufficient." James smiled faintly. "It usually is." Dana's jaw tightened. "Sir, your refusal to answer basic questions is escalating this situation." "No," James said. "Your assumptions are." Silence pooled in the room. The camera hummed. Luke shifted, restless, the way men did when authority didn't land the way they expected. Dana straightened her shoulders. "I'm going to ask you to hand over your phone while we complete this report." James didn't move. "On what grounds?" "Security review." "That's not a legal ground." Luke pushed off the wall. "You think you're smarter than everyone here." James looked at him. "I think I'm careful." Luke stepped closer, invading space. "Careful gets people hurt." James's voice stayed calm. "Careless does." Dana raised a hand. "Enough." She looked at James, searching his face now, really looking. "Why won't you just do what you're told?" "Because I've seen where that ends," he thought. "Because I've stood in rooms where men begged for mercy they never got. Because obedience without reason is how systems rot." He said none of it. He said, "Because you're asking me to give up rights without cause." Dana exhaled sharply. "You're not in a courtroom." "No," James said, "but the law didn't stop at the jet bridge." Luke laughed, humorless. "You hear this guy?" Dana glanced at the camera, then back to James. Her voice lowered. "Off the record. If you just wait here until the fight departs, this goes away. You'll be rebooked. No report, no trouble." James tilted his head. "And the woman who lied?" Dana stiffened. "Watch your words." "She accused me of behavior that didn't happen. She felt threatened. James leaned back in the chair, the metal creaking. You keep using that phrase like it absolves everything. Luke's hand drifted toward his belt. Careful. James met his eyes again. You are. Another silence, thicker now. Outside the room, a cart rattled past. A laugh echoed from somewhere distant. Normal life, brushing up against this small pocket of wrongness. Dana broke first. I'm escalating this, she said. She stepped out, the door swinging shut behind her. Luke stayed. He studied James openly now, the way men did when they were trying to decide how much force they could get away with. You got a problem with authority, he said. James shook his head. I have a problem with misuse. Luke scoffed. Same thing. No, James said. Authority exists to protect. Misuse exists to control. Luke's mouth tightened. You sound like my father. James smiled, just a little. Was he right? Luke looked away. The door opened again. Dana returned with a man James hadn't seen before. Tall, broad, late 50s, salt and pepper hair cut short. His badge read Operations Manager, but the way he carried himself told a different story. This was someone used to rooms going quiet when he entered. Mr. Carter, the man said, extending a hand he didn't expect James to take. I'm Frank Doyle. James didn't take it. Frank withdrew his hand smoothly, unfazed. I'm told you're refusing to cooperate. I'm refusing to surrender my phone without cause. Frank nodded. We can resolve this without making it bigger than it needs to be. James studied him. Frank's eyes were sharp, calculating, not stupid. That made him more dangerous. You're delaying a flight, Frank continued. That has consequences. I'm not on the flight anymore. You were removed because you became a liability. James leaned forward. No, I was removed because it was easier than asking questions. Frank smiled thinly. Sometimes easy is efficient, and sometimes it's illegal. The smile faded a fraction. Frank glanced at the camera, then back. You want to bring lawyers into this? I want to bring truth. Luke snorted from the corner. Frank folded his hands. Here's what's going to happen. You'll wait here until the aircraft departs. We'll review the footage. If nothing appears concerning, you'll be rebooked. End of story. And my phone. Frank's gaze hardened. We'll hold it for the duration. James felt the weight of the moment settle. This was the line. Cross it, and things changed. Stay silent, and they'd take what they wanted. He thought of Margaret Collins, of the tremor in her hand, of the way she'd watched exits. He thought of patterns, of years spent watching people lie with their whole bodies. He looked at Frank. You don't want my phone. Frank raised an eyebrow. Is that a threat? No, James said. It's a warning. Luke laughed. This guy. James turns to him. You still have time, he said softly. Luke's smile faltered. Frank's voice cooled. Sir, last chance to cooperate. James reached into his jacket, slow enough that no one could mistake intent. Luke stiffened, hand snapping to his radio. Hey! James pulled out not his phone, but a worn leather wallet. He held it closed, resting it on the table. I will show you something, he said. And when I do, this stops being about compliance. Frank's eyes narrowed. You don't get to dictate terms. James met his gaze, unblinking. You already crossed that line. For a long second, no one moved. The camera watched. The airport breathed around them. Somewhere, a gate agent announced final boarding. James opened the wallet halfway, just enough for a glint of gold to catch the light. Not fully. Not yet. Frank's face changed. Not panic. Not fear. Something else. Calculation turning to dread. James closed the wallet again. "Get legal," Frank said quietly. And for the first time since the jet bridge, James Carter felt the balance shift. Frank Doyle didn't sit down. He paced the length of the room instead, slow and deliberate, like a man measuring walls he might soon be trapped inside. The flicker of unease James had planted now spread, thin cracks running through Frank's composure. Luke stood straighter, radio still clipped to his belt, eyes darting between Frank and the closed wallet on the table, as if it might explode. Dana reappeared in the doorway, breath slightly fast. "Legal says we're within policy," she said. Her voice was steady, but her fingers worried the edge of her tablet. "Temporary retention of personal devices is allowed during a security review." James looked at her. "Policy isn't law." Frank stopped pacing. "You're awfully confident for someone sitting in an airport back office." James folded his hands. "Confidence comes from knowing where the lines are." Frank leaned in, palms on the table. "You want to explain that wallet?" James didn't touch it. "I want you to explain why a private contractor thinks it can hold a citizen against his will." Luke bristled. "You're not being held." James turned to him. "The door is locked." Silence. Luke glanced at the handle, then away. Frank straightened. "This is getting dramatic." "No," James said. "It's getting accurate." Dana cleared her throat. "Mr. Carter, if you would just calm down." James's gaze softened for a moment. "I am calm. You're nervous." That landed harder than any accusation. Dana's cheeks flushed. Frank exhaled through his nose. "All right, show me." James waited. He watched Frank's eyes, the micro-expressions, the way control shifted when curiosity outweighed caution. He had learned long ago that people revealed more when they thought they were still in charge. Slowly, deliberately, James opened the wallet fully and placed it flat on the table. The gold caught the overhead light and held it. The seal, the name, the photograph older but unmistakable, the letters clear and unforgiving. FBI. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Luke took a step back without realizing it. Dana froze, tablet slipping in her grip. Frank stared, lips parting just enough to betray the calculation racing behind his eyes. "That's not funny," Luke said weakly. James didn't look at him. "It's not a joke." Dana swallowed. "Anyone can get a badge." James finally met her eyes. "Not one that triggers a federal verification code tied to my name." Frank recovered first. He leaned closer, inspecting, searching for flaws. "You should have said something sooner." James closed the wallet. "You should have asked better questions." Frank straightened, face tightening. "If this is legitimate, then you're operating under false pretenses." "I'm operating under authorization." Luke's voice cracked. "Why didn't you tell us who you were?" James looked at him then. Really looked. "Because you never saw me as someone worth asking." That hit Luke harder than the badge. His jaw worked, words failing him. Dana spoke, quieter now. "What is it you want?" James breathed out slowly. This was the moment where force could have entered, where threats could have been made. He chose restraint. Again. "I want to return to my seat," he said. "And I want you to document exactly what happened here. Every word, every decision." Frank hesitated. "The flight has already pushed back." James nodded. "Then I want to know why." Frank's eyes flicked to Dana, to Luke, to the camera in the corner. He made a choice. We'll verify your credentials, he said. Until then, you'll remain here. James leaned back. You're doubling down. Frank's voice sharpened. You showed a badge. That doesn't give you command. James's eyes hardened. No, the law does. Frank turned toward the door. Get me the number on the badge. Dana moved. Luke didn't. He stared at James now, something like shame creeping into his posture. Are you really FBI? He asked. James answered him, not unkindly. I wouldn't lie about that. Luke nodded slowly, processing. Then that woman, the one on the plane. James didn't answer. He didn't need to. Minutes passed, or maybe seconds. Time bent in rooms like this. The camera hummed. Somewhere, a printer chirped. Dana returned, phone pressed to her ear, face pale. It's confirmed, she said, barely above a whisper. James Carter, field office out of D.C. Active. The room changed. Frank closed his eyes for a brief second, the way men did when they realized the ground beneath them was no longer solid. When he opened them, something colder stared back. Why are you here? Frank asked. James leaned forward. Because someone on that plane doesn't belong there. Luke's breath caught. You think she's a threat? I think she's a liability, James said. And you helped her? Dana shook her head. We didn't know. James's voice dropped. You didn't want to. Frank crossed his arms. You accusing my staff of misconduct. I'm stating facts. Frank's jaw clenched. Be careful. James met his stare. You already crossed careful. The door burst open then. A uniformed Port Authority officer stepped in, breathless. We've got a situation at the gate, he said. Passenger refusing to comply. Claims she's being targeted. James stood. The room seemed smaller now that he filled it. That would be Margaret Collins. Frank stiffened. You know her? I know her type. Luke found his voice. What do we do? James didn't hesitate. You escort me back to the aircraft. Dana protested. We can't just... James cut her off. Not loud, not angry, just final. You can, and you will, or this conversation moves into a courtroom. Frank weighed it. The cost, the exposure. He nodded once. Let's go. They moved fast now, down the corridor, through doors that opened without challenge. James walked ahead, posture straight, the years falling away from him with every step. Passengers stared as they passed. Whispers followed. At the gate, chaos simmered. Margaret Collins stood near the counter, voice raised, eyes bright with controlled fury. This is unacceptable, she was saying. I want names. She saw James and stopped. For a fraction of a second, the mask slipped. James saw it. The recognition. The fear. He met her gaze across the terminal. He didn't smile. He didn't glare. He simply stood there, immovable, the weight of the truth settling between them. And Margaret Collins understood that the man she'd tried to erase had just stepped fully into the light. Margaret recovered quickly. She always did. By the time James reached the edge of the gate area, her voice was smooth again, practiced, loud enough to gather witnesses, but careful not to fracture. I'm being singled out, she said, one manicured hand pressed to her chest. I've done nothing wrong. I want to speak to someone in charge. Frank Doyle stepped in front of the counter, palms out, the universal signal for pause. Ma'am, he said, measured. We need you to lower your voice. Margaret's eyes never left James. Is this about him? James didn't answer. He watched her shoulders, the shallow rise and fall, the way she angled her body to block the view of her bag. Fear hid in details like that. Dana Whitcomb hovered near the gate agent, whispering urgently. The agent nodded, fingers flying over keys. The boarding door remained open. A few passengers lingered nearby, pretending to scroll through phones while listening with professional curiosity. Luke Hanley stood off to the side, arms stiff, no longer certain where authority rested. "Ma'am," Frank said again, "we're going to ask you to step aside." Margaret laughed, a quick, brittle sound. "For what? Because I spoke up? Because I refused to be intimidated?" She pointed at James. "He's the one who was staring. He followed me. Now you bring him back like he's some kind of hero." James stepped forward. The crowd quieted without realizing why. "You recognized me," he said calmly. Margaret blinked. "I have no idea who you are." "You saw me at another airport," James said. "Different terminal, different city. You looked twice." "That's absurd." "You adjusted your scarf," James said, "left shoulder first. Same tell you used just now." Her mouth opened, then closed. A small crack. She covered it fast. "You're inventing patterns." "I study them." Frank glanced between them. "Mr. Carter," he said, cautious now, "we need specifics." James nodded. On the flight, she wasn't afraid of me. She was afraid of what I might see. Margaret scoffed. "This is harassment." James held her gaze. "What were you working on when you accused me?" "That's none of your business." "It becomes my business when you lie to remove me." Frank lifted a hand. "Enough, both of you." A uniformed Port Authority sergeant approached, older, slower, eyes sharp with experience. "What's going on?" he asked. Frank answered. "Passenger dispute escalated. We're resolving." The sergeant looked at James, then at Margaret, then at the cluster of staff. He read rooms the way sailors read weather. "Looks like you already did," he said dryly. Margaret seized the opening. "Sergeant, I feel unsafe. This man is targeting me." The sergeant studied her for a long beat. "How?" "He was watching my screen. What was on it?" Margaret bristled. "That's private." The sergeant nodded. "So is an accusation." James spoke quietly. She used a phrase designed to trigger removal. She knew the process. Margaret laughed again, too fast. "Now I'm an expert on airline security." James didn't smile. "You fly enough to learn which words open doors." Frank turned to Dana. "Get TSA." Dana hesitated. "They're tied up at another terminal." Frank cursed under his breath. Time pressure again. Always time. Margaret glanced at the boarding door. My flight. James followed her gaze. "You're worried about missing it." "I have a connection." "So do I," James said. "To the truth." She turned on him then, anger flaring. "You don't get to lecture me." James's voice stayed level. "You don't get to weaponize fear." The sergeant raised his voice slightly. "All right, phones away. Everyone breathe." Margaret reached for her bag. James saw it before anyone else. The subtle shift. The way her fingers curled protectively. He stepped closer. "Don't," he said. She froze. The sergeant noticed. "Ma'am, it's just my things." James nodded. "Then you won't mind setting it down?" Her eyes flicked to Frank, to Dana, to the watching passengers. The calculation ran. She smiled, too wide. "This is ridiculous." "Set it down," the sergeant repeated. She did, slowly. The bag hit the floor with a dull thud. James crouched, careful, respectful. May I? Frank hesitated, then nodded. Under observation. James opened the bag just enough to see. A laptop, a folio, a charger. And beneath them, something that didn't belong. A small device disguised as an everyday accessory. James didn't touch it. He straightened. That, he said, pointing, is why she panicked. Margaret lunged. Luke moved without thinking, blocking her. The crowd gasped. Phones rose higher. "That's private property," Margaret snapped, breath quickening. The sergeant peered in. "That doesn't look like a phone." James met Frank's eyes. "You need a warrant to go further, but you don't need one to stop her from leaving." Margaret's composure shattered. "You can't hold me!" Frank's jaw worked. "We can delay. For how long?" "For long enough," James said. Margaret's voice dropped. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." James leaned in, close enough that only she could hear. "I do, and you made a mistake." Her eyes went wide. "You don't know anything." "I know you tried to erase me instead of ignoring me," James said. "That's not what innocent people do." The boarding announcement chimed. Final call. Margaret's breathing turned shallow. She looked at the sergeant. "Are you going to let him do this?" The sergeant shrugged. "You gave us cause." She laughed, high and sharp. "Cause? For what? For suspicion?" James straightened. "For obstruction." Frank made the call. "Close the door." The gate agent hesitated, then complied. The door slid shut. A collective murmur rippled through the waiting area. Margaret stared at it, then at James. "You think you've won?" James shook his head. "This isn't a game." Sirens echoed faintly somewhere beyond the glass. Approaching. Not fast. Measured. The sergeant stepped back. "Mom, please remain here." Margaret's shoulders sagged for the first time. Not defeat. Something colder. "You think stopping me stops anything?" James met her gaze. "It starts something." She smiled then, slow and dangerous. "You're late." James felt it, the edge beneath the words. He nodded once. "Maybe." "But I showed up." The crowd pressed closer. The airport held its breath. And somewhere in the building, systems designed for moments like this began to turn, grinding slowly, irresistibly, toward consequence. The sirens didn't rush in. They circled the building first, distant and deliberate, like a reminder rather than a threat. James felt the shift before anyone said a word. Authority was moving, real authority, the kind that didn't need to shout. Margaret Collins stood very still, too still. Her hands rested at her sides now, fingers curled, nails biting into her palms. The smile she wore was thin, practiced, but the eyes behind it were sharp with calculation. She was already adjusting. People like her always did. Frank Doyle lowered his voice. "Port Authority units are on their way," he said to no one in particular. "Until then, no one leaves." Margaret laughed softly. "You think that helps you?" James watched her face, the subtle tells she didn't know she had. "It helps everyone," he said. "Except you." She turned on him. "You don't even know what you're accusing me of." "I know why you panicked," James said. "And I know why you used the words you used." Dana Whitcomb hovered near the counter, pale now, her tablet forgotten. Luke Hanley stood with his back to the wall, jaw clenched, eyes darting between Margaret and James, like a man realizing the story he'd told himself was wrong. Margaret took a step closer to James, lowering her voice. "You pulled me into this because you needed a win." James didn't flinch. I pulled you into this because you tried to erase me. Her eyes flashed. You're nothing. The words were meant to cut. They didn't. James had heard worse, in darker rooms, from men with guns and nothing to lose. He let the silence answer for him. The first officers arrived minutes later. 2 Port Authority uniforms, older men, movements unhurried. They took in the scene in seconds. The closed gate, the watching crowd. The woman with the too expensive coat, and the man standing like he belonged anywhere. Afternoon, the taller one said. Who's in charge here? Frank stepped forward. I am. The officer looked at him. You sure? Frank hesitated. A beat. Yes. The officer's gaze slid to James. Sir. James nodded. Officer. The exchange was subtle but telling. The officer clocked it. Respect recognized respect. What's the issue? The officer asked. Margaret spoke immediately. I'm being detained without cause. James waited. The officer turned to him. Is that true? James chose his words carefully. She made a false safety claim to remove me from a flight. When that failed, she attempted to leave with material that raised concern. The officer raised an eyebrow. Material? James nodded toward the bag on the floor. Disguised equipment. Margaret scoffed. This is absurd. The officer crouched, peering into the bag without touching. He straightened. That doesn't look like a charger. Margaret's voice sharpened. Are you trained to identify electronics now? The officer smiled faintly. I'm trained to notice when people lie. A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd. Frank cleared his throat. We're holding until federal guidance arrives. The officer's eyes flicked to him. Federal. James reached into his jacket, slow, deliberate. He didn't rush it. He let the moment stretch, let the room lean in. He produced the wallet again, opened it fully this time, and held it at chest height. The badge didn't glow. It didn't need to. The officers stiffened. The taller one leaned in, reading. Special Agent James Carter. James met his eyes. That's correct. The officer straightened. Why wasn't I informed? Frank swallowed. We were verifying. Margaret's composure cracked. This is ridiculous, she said. You're taking his word over mine. The officer looked at her. Man, he's not asking to leave. James closed the wallet. I'm asking for process. The second officer nodded. We can do that. Margaret stepped back, scanning the area. The exits, the people, the odds. She exhaled sharply. You think this ends here? James watched her, thoughtful. No, he said. I think this starts somewhere you've been avoiding. Her eyes narrowed. You don't know who you're dealing with. James tilted his head. Neither did you. A radio crackled. The officer listened, then nodded. We're escorting her to a secondary screening area. Margaret snapped. I will not be treated like a criminal. James spoke, calm. Then stop acting like someone with something to hide. She lunged then. Not at James, at the bag. Luke moved on instinct, blocking her path. She stumbled, caught herself, fury blazing. Get out of my way! The officer stepped between them. Ma'am? Margaret's breathing quickened. The mask was gone now. You can't do this, she said, voice rising. I have rights. James nodded. So did I. The officers guided her away. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She went rigid, chin high, eyes burning holes into James as she passed. You're making a mistake, she said softly. You think you're the first. James didn't respond. He didn't need to. As she disappeared down the corridor, the energy shifted again. The crowd exhaled. Phones lowered. Whispers spread like aftershocks. Frank stood frozen, color drained. Dana sank into a chair, hands shaking. Luke stared at the floor. The taller officer turned to James. "You want to explain?" James nodded. "In time. For now." "For now," James said, "you document everything." The officer smiled. "Already am." They walked back toward the holding office. The same narrow room, the same table. But it felt different now. Smaller. Exposed. Frank finally spoke. "You blindsided us." James looked at him. "You blindsided yourselves." Frank's voice cracked. "We were just doing our jobs." James's gaze hardened. "You were doing them without asking why." Luke looked up. "I didn't know." James softened, just a fraction. "That's the problem." Outside, the airport resumed its rhythm. Flights departed. People moved on. But something had lodged itself into the machinery, a grain of truth grinding against routine. James sat, folding his hands. He felt the weight of the years press in. The cost of doing this work. The cost of being seen only when it was convenient. He knew this wasn't over. He knew Margaret wasn't the end. But for the first time since the jet bridge, he allowed himself a breath. Because the system, flawed as it was, had finally paused long enough to listen. They didn't put Margaret Collins in handcuffs. Not yet. They didn't need to. The escort down the corridor was quiet, controlled, almost polite. That was how real power moved. No spectacle, no shouting, just inevitability. James watched from a distance as she walked between the officers, chin lifted, steps measured. Every inch the woman who had spent her life believing consequences were for other people. The secondary screening area was a windowless suite tucked behind an unmarked door. Neutral paint, a long table, chairs bolted down. The kind of room designed to slow time. Margaret was seated at one end, hands folded now, breathing steady again. She had rebuilt herself quickly. That alone told James how long she'd been doing this. Frank Doyle lingered near the doorway, pale and sweating, his authority evaporating by the second. Dana Whitcomb stood off to the side, arms wrapped around herself, eyes fixed on the floor. Luke Hanley hovered near the wall, posture stiff, face drawn tight with something between regret and fear. The Port Authority sergeant turned to James. "You want to take lead?" It wasn't a question. James nodded once. He stepped into the room and felt the familiar shift as eyes turned to him, measuring, recalibrating. He didn't rush. He placed his briefcase on the table, sat, and rested his hands on the surface, palms down. The room went quiet. Margaret spoke first. "I want a lawyer." James met her gaze. "You'll get one. Now." "You'll get one," he repeated, "after we secure the situation." She laughed softly. "You think closing a gate and embarrassing me secures anything?" James didn't rise to it. "I think you underestimated how visible patterns become when pressure is applied." Her eyes flicked to the door, to Frank, to the officers. She was mapping exits again. Always mapping. "You still haven't told me what you think you found." James nodded toward the bag, now sealed in a clear evidence sleeve on the table. "You brought specialized equipment onto a domestic flight without declaring it. It's a personal device. It's a signal relay disguised as one," James said. "Modified, not consumer grade." Margaret's smile tightened. "You're guessing." "I'm observing." The sergeant stepped closer. "We ran the serial through preliminary databases. It's flagged." Margaret's composure slipped, just a hair. She recovered instantly. "Flagged doesn't mean illegal." "No," James said. "It means interesting." She leaned back. "You think I'm part of something bigger?" James watched her face as he spoke. I think you don't panic unless the stakes are high. She studied him now, really studied him, as if seeing him for the first time. You enjoy this? James shook his head. I endure it. Luke cleared his throat. Sir, he said, voice rough. What does this mean for us? James turned to him. It means the truth matters. Luke swallowed. We were told to act fast. By whom? Luke hesitated. His eyes flicked to Frank, then back to James. By procedure. James didn't press, not yet. The sergeant's radio crackled. He listened, nodded, then looked at James. Federal liaison is en route, about 20 minutes. Margaret scoffed. You're holding me for 20 minutes on suspicion. James met her gaze. No. We're holding you because you lied to remove me, attempted to leave with flagged equipment, and triggered a security response under false pretenses. Her voice sharpened. I felt unsafe. James leaned forward slightly. No, you felt exposed. That did it. The mask cracked wider this time. You have no idea what you're stepping into, she said, low and venomous. You think I operate alone? I know you don't, James said. That's why you're still here. Frank shifted near the door. This is spiraling, he muttered. James turned to him. You should be grateful. Frank blinked. For what? For the fact that I stopped this where I did, James said, before it became something else. Frank's face flushed. We didn't mean. You meant to remove a problem quickly, James cut in. You meant to avoid paperwork. You meant to keep a VIP happy. Dana finally spoke, voice small. We didn't know. James looked at her. You didn't ask. The words hung heavy. Margaret laughed again, but there was no humor in it now. You're very good at this, she said, playing the righteous man. James's eyes hardened. I am very good at noticing when people confuse confidence with innocence. She leaned forward. You think you caught something today? I think you showed me where to look next. The door opened then, and a man in a dark suit stepped in, flanked by another agent James recognized. No uniforms, no raised voices, just presence. The room adjusted instantly. Special Agent Carter, the man said. I'm Alan Reeves, Domestic Security Liaison. James stood. They shook hands, brief and firm. Thank you for coming. Reeves turned his attention to Margaret. Man? Margaret straightened. Finally, someone competent. Reeves smiled faintly. We'll see. He nodded to the evidence bag. Preliminary analysis confirms unauthorized transmission capability. Margaret's breath caught. Just for a second. Reeves continued. We're opening a formal inquiry. You're not under arrest at this time, but you are not free to leave. Her voice rose. This is outrageous! James spoke calmly. It's procedure. She rounded on him. You did this! James didn't deny it. You started it! Reeves turned to Frank. I'll need statements from everyone involved. Frank's shoulders sagged. Of course. Luke raised a hand slightly. Sir, he said, voice tight, I want to cooperate. James nodded. That would be wise. Margaret watched this, eyes narrowing, anger giving way to something colder. You think dismantling me fixes anything? James met her stare. I think it stops you from hiding behind normalcy. She smiled then. Not kind, not afraid. You're going to need more than instincts. James leaned back, folding his hands. Good thing I have a record. The room filled with quiet movement. Phones came out, notes were taken, orders issued. The machinery engaged.
James sat still, letting it happen. He felt the familiar weight settle on his shoulders. This was the part no one filmed. No dragging, no shouting. Just the slow, grinding work of accountability.
Margaret was escorted out, no longer the center of the room, just another subject in an expanding file. As she passed James, she leaned in. "You won a round," she whispered. "Not the game." James didn't look at her. "I'm not playing." When the door closed behind her, the room exhaled. Reeves turned to James. "You okay?" James nodded. "I will be." Reeves studied him. "You sure you want to stay on this?" James thought of the jet bridge, the mural, the hands on his jacket, the easy assumptions. "Yes," he said. Reeves smiled, grim. "Then let's get to work." Outside, the airport lights flickered as evening settled in. Flights took off. Passengers arrived. The world kept moving, unaware that a quiet fracture had just opened beneath the surface. And James Carter, once again underestimated, leaned forward into it, ready to follow the cracks wherever they led. Night pressed against the terminal windows like a held breath. The airport never truly slept, but it changed character after dark. Counter footsteps. Quieter voices. People moved with purpose or not at all. James Carter stood near the glass, watching planes taxi under yellow floodlights, each one carrying lives that would never intersect with his again. Not tonight. Not after this. Alan Reeves finished a call and slipped the phone back into his jacket. "We're widening the scub," he said. The device in her bag wasn't just flagged. It's part of a known architecture. James didn't turn. "Commercial. Military adjacent," Reeves corrected. "Old contracts. Obsolete on paper. Still useful if you know where to point them." James nodded. That fit. Margaret Collins didn't move small. She moved legacy. Who signed off? Reeves hesitated. That's where it gets uncomfortable. James finally faced him. It was already uncomfortable when I was dragged off a plane. Reeves held his gaze. Someone inside the vendor chain. Someone with access to travel manifests. James's jaw tightened. Then this wasn't about her alone. "No," Reeves said. "She's a courier. Or she was." They walked down the corridor together, past closed shops and dim kiosks. Their footsteps echoed. "Where is she now?" James asked. "On her way to a federal holding suite downtown," Reeves said. "Voluntary for the moment." "For the moment," James repeated. He stopped walking. Reeves stopped too. "She said something to me," James continued. "About being late. About this not ending." Reeves nodded. "That's not bravado." James exhaled slowly. She wasn't panicking because she got caught. She panicked because I wasn't supposed to be there. Reeves's expression sharpened. "You think this was timed?" "I think I was a variable they didn't account for." They reached a small conference room overlooking the tarmac. Inside, a whiteboard already held scribbles. Names, arrows, dates. Dana Whitcomb sat in the corner, shoulders slumped, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. Luke Hanley leaned against the wall, staring at nothing. Frank Doyle was gone, removed quietly, escorted by men who didn't explain. James took a seat. The chair creaked. "All right," he said. "Start from the beginning." Luke spoke first. His voice was hoarse. "We got an alert this morning. Priority passenger, high value. Keep her moving." James looked at him. "From whom?" Luke swallowed. "A regional operations memo. Came down through the usual channels." Reeves stepped in. "Who signed it?" Luke closed his eyes. "I don't know. It was embedded. Looked routine. James nodded. That's how it works. Dana lifted her head. She wasn't the only one, she said quietly. James turned to her. Explain. We've had others, Dana continued. Passengers who triggered expedited handling. No screening delays, no questions. I thought it was customer service. James's voice was steady. How many? Dana hesitated. Dozens, over the past year. The room went still. Reeves exhaled. That's a pipeline. James leaned back, eyes closing for a brief moment. He saw it now. Not a single flight, not a single woman. A pattern hiding inside convenience, inside politeness, inside the instinct to avoid conflict. Did any of them ever make accusations? James asked. Dana nodded. When they needed to. Luke spoke again, quieter now. We were told to trust them. James opened his eyes. That's the oldest trick in the book. Reeves scribbled on the board. We're pulling manifests, rewinding 6 months. Go further, James said. A year. Reeves glanced at him. That's a lot of data. So is human damage, James replied. A junior agent entered, breathless. We have an issue, he said. Margaret Collins requested counsel. High profile. Reeves sighed. Of course she did. She also requested to speak with you, the agent added, nodding at James. James stood. I'll go. Reeves raised an eyebrow. You don't have to. James met his eyes. I want to hear what she thinks leverage sounds like. The holding suite was quieter than the airport. Cleaner, designed to feel neutral. Margaret sat at the table, hands folded, expression composed. She looked up as James entered. Her smile was thin, but controlled. You came, she said. James took the seat opposite her. You asked. She studied him. You enjoy moral theatre. I enjoy clarity. She laughed softly. Then let me be clear. You stopped a delivery. That's all. James leaned forward. You tried to erase me from a flight. Because you were a risk. To whom? To momentum, she said. To schedules. To things bigger than either of us. James's eyes narrowed. You think size equals immunity. She tilted her head. I think you know how this works. I know how it ends, James said. Margaret smiled. Do you? She leaned in. The people you're circling don't sit in airports. They don't wear uniforms. They fund institutions you respect. James didn't break eye contact. Then they should have been more careful with their couriers. Her smile faltered. You think replacing me stops anything? I think it slows it, James said, and slowing things down is how light gets in. She scoffed. You're old-fashioned. James nodded. And you're predictable. Silence stretched. Margaret exhaled, frustration leaking through. You won't find what you're looking for. James stood. I already did. He left her there, words echoing in the sterile air. Back in the conference room, the energy had shifted. Phones rang, screens glowed, names appeared and disappeared. The machinery Reeves had promised was fully awake now. Reeves looked up as James entered. We traced the memo, he said. It originated outside the airport authority. James leaned in. Where? A consultancy, defense adjacent, clean reputation. James smiled without warmth. They always are. Luke approached him, hesitant. Sir, he said, I want to apologize. James looked at him. Really looked. Apologies matter when they change behavior. Luke nodded. They will. James placed a hand on his shoulder. Brief, heavy. Then remember today. Outside, a plane lifted into the dark sky, engines roaring, lights blinking against the black. James watched it climb until it vanished. He felt the familiar pull. The work wasn't done. It never was. But this time, the thread was clear, and he intended to follow it, no matter how high it led. Because being dragged off a plane was humiliating. Being silent afterward would have been unforgivable. And somewhere above the clouds, the systems that relied on invisibility were starting to realize that one man refusing to disappear could change everything. Morning came without ceremony. A thin grey light crept across the tarmac, flattening the world into steel and glass. James Carter hadn't slept. He sat in a small operations room off the terminal, coffee cooling in his hand, watching names scroll across a screen that hadn't existed for him 12 hours earlier. Flight numbers, vendor codes, internal memos tagged routine, patterns hiding in plain sight. Alan Reeves stood behind him, jacket off now, sleeves rolled. The tie had disappeared somewhere during the night. We confirmed it, Reeves said. The consultancy isn't just advising. They're coordinating. James didn't turn. They wouldn't risk this many touchpoints unless they were insulated. They are, Reeves said. Shell boards, retired officials, clean resumes. James nodded. Until they aren't. A junior analyst spoke from the far desk. We traced 3 more expedited passengers through the same channel. Different airports, same language in the memos. James leaned forward. What language? High confidence, minimal friction, executive priority. James closed his eyes for a moment. He could hear it now. The euphemisms. The way wrongdoing learned to dress itself in efficiency. Who approved the language? The analyst swallowed. It was pre-approved, embedded in the template. Reeves exhaled. Which means no one questioned it. Which means everyone did, James said quietly. They just didn't want to be the one who asked. The door opened. A woman in a dark blazer entered, badge clipped to her belt. Late 40s, sharp eyes. She moved like she already knew where everything was. I'm Rebecca Holt, she said. Internal oversight. Reeves straightened. That was quick. Holt smiled thinly. It always is when optics get involved. James stood. They shook hands. James Carter. I know, Holt said. You made a mess. I interrupted a process, James corrected. She studied him. Those are the same thing to people who benefit. She glanced at the screens. You understand what you've stepped into? James nodded. I understand the cost of stepping around it. Holt gestured to a chair. Walk me through last night. James did. He kept it factual, no embellishment, no righteous heat, just decisions and consequences. When he finished, Holt sat back, fingers steepled. You realize your presence wasn't random. I do now. You were flagged weeks ago, she said, quietly. James's jaw tightened. By whom? We're still confirming, Holt said. But someone saw your travel pattern and decided you were noise. Reeves frowned. They tried to remove him preemptively. Holt nodded. And failed. James looked at the screen again. Margaret Collins wasn't late, he said. She was ahead of schedule. Holt's eyes sharpened. Explain. She said I was late, James continued. Not that this was ending. That I was late. That implies a timetable. Reeves caught it. A delivery window. Or a transfer, James said. If she missed it, someone else had to adjust. The analyst looked up. We just got a hit, she said. Another passenger rerouted last night. Same consultancy. Different city. James stood. Then this isn't contained. Holt rose with him. No, it's accelerating. They moved fast now. Calls placed, doors opened. The airport felt different in daylight, exposed.
Every shortcut looked suspicious. Every polite smile carried weight.
In a secured conference room downtown, screens lit up with maps. Nodes appeared. Lines connected. What had felt abstract at midnight took shape by morning. Not a conspiracy. A supply chain. Reeves pointed. They use comfort, predictability, people who don't ask questions. James watched the web grow. They use our trust in systems. Holt turned to him. You're supposed to be retiring. James met her gaze. I know. She nodded. Then you won't mind if we keep you off record. James almost smiled. I prefer it that way. A phone buzzed. Holt glanced at it. We have a problem. James didn't ask. He waited. Margaret Collins is talking, Holt continued. But not the way we want. Reeves stiffened. She's bargaining. She's redirecting, Holt said, offering names that don't matter. James folded his arms. She's protecting someone. Holt studied him. Who? James thought of her words, of institutions, of funding, of respectability. Someone who looks untouchable. Holt exhaled. We have one of those. They reconvened hours later. Evidence stacked, timelines aligned. The consultancy's board list sat projected on the wall. Familiar names, retired, celebrated. Men who spoke about duty and legacy at conferences. Reeves said it first. This will blow back. Holt nodded. It always does. James leaned forward. Then we do it clean. Holt looked at him. Define clean. By the book, James said. No shortcuts, no leaks, no spectacle. Reeves frowned. That takes time. James met his eyes. So does healing. A pause. Then Holt nodded. All right. That afternoon, James was called back to the holding suite. Margaret sat straighter now, a legal pad in front of her, counsel at her side. She smiled when she saw him. I wondered when you'd come. James took a seat. You wanted to trade. She tilted her head. I want protection. From whom? She hesitated, just a beat. James saw it. From the people who will let me burn, she said, quietly. James nodded. Then tell the truth. She laughed bitterly. Truth is expensive. So is silence, James said. She studied him. You think you're different. I know I am, James said. I didn't build my life on pretending not to see. Her eyes flicked to the glass, to the camera, to the guards. You won't touch them. James leaned in. Watch us. She swallowed. You don't understand how deep this goes. James's voice was steady. I understand depth. I don't fear it. Silence stretched. Then she exhaled, shoulders sagging just enough. You want the name, she said. James didn't rush her. He waited. She wrote it down, pushed the pad across the table. James read it once, then again. He felt the room tilt. Back in the conference room, Holt read it too. Her face went still. That's a problem, Reeves muttered. That's a war. James folded the paper. It's accountability. Holt looked at him. If we move on this, there's no going back. James nodded. There never is. Outside, the city moved through its day unaware. Traffic, meetings, lives uninterrupted. James Carter stood at the center of a widening circle and felt the familiar weight settle again. Not pride, not fear. Responsibility. Because the man they'd dragged off a plane hadn't just refused to disappear. He had forced a system to look at itself in daylight. The name didn't travel fast. It couldn't. Names like that never did. They moved through channels designed to absorb shock, to dull edges, to delay consequence until interest faded. James Carter understood this better than anyone in the room. He'd watched truth suffocate under process before. That was why he didn't rush now. He stood alone by the window, city traffic threading far below, while Alan Reeves and Rebecca Holt argued in low voices behind him. Words like jurisdiction, exposure, coordination floated past without landing. James was somewhere else. He was replaying Margaret Collins's face when she'd written the name. The pause, the breath, the way her hand had trembled just once. Fear finally unmasked. Holt broke away and joined him. "If we proceed," she said quietly, "we're stepping into political weather." James didn't turn. "Weather passes. Damage doesn't," she replied. James nodded. "Neither does avoidance." Holt studied him. "You're not wrong. You're just early." "That's what they said when they dragged me off the plane," James said. "That I was inconvenient." She almost smiled. Almost. Reeves approached, phone still in hand. "We have eyes on the consultancy principals," he said. "They're closing ranks." James turned now. "Of course they are. They're calling this a misunderstanding," Reeves continued. "A process failure. They want to offer cooperation." James's gaze hardened. They want to control the narrative. Holt crossed her arms. "They'll throw someone low-level to us, someone expendable." "Then we don't take the bait," James said. Reeves hesitated. "That means patience." James met his eyes. "It means discipline." The room fell quiet. Outside, sirens wailed and faded. Inside, the machinery recalibrated. Holt nodded slowly. "All right. We do this clean. We document. We corroborate. We let them think time is on their side." James exhaled. Time always thinks that. Later, alone in a temporary office, James finally allowed himself to sit. The chair was uncomfortable, the coffee bitter. He welcomed both. Comfort dulled edge. He needed edge. He opened his briefcase and removed a thin folder he hadn't touched in years. Old habits. Inside were notes from cases that had never made headlines. Quiet endings. Careers derailed without press releases. Lives saved without applause. This was where his work had always lived. In margins. In footnotes. A knock at the door. Luke Hanley stepped in, eyes red-rimmed, posture unsure. "They said I could talk to you." James gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit." Luke did. He fidgeted, then stilled. "I keep thinking about that moment," he said. "On the jet bridge." James listened. "I grabbed you," Luke continued. "Didn't even ask. I just assumed." James nodded. "Assumptions are efficient." "They're dangerous," Luke said. "Yes," James agreed. Luke swallowed. "I don't know how to make that right." James leaned back. "You remember it. You question the next one. That's how." Luke nodded, relief and shame mingling. "Thank you." James watched him go, hoping the lesson would stick. Hoping the system might, in small ways, correct itself. By evening, the city's energy shifted again. News vans gathered near federal buildings, drawn by whispers they didn't yet understand. Phones rang off hooks. Statements were drafted and redrafted. Holt moved through it all with quiet authority, insulating the work from spectacle. James found Reeves near a whiteboard filled with arrows and dates. "They're moving assets," Reeves said, "transferring responsibilities." "Good," James replied. "It means they're nervous." Reeves looked at him. "You ready for what comes next?" James considered the question, the retirement papers waiting on his desk back home. The quiet life he'd promised himself. The cost he'd already paid. "No," he said honestly, "but I'm willing." That night, James returned to the airport one last time. Not to fly, to stand where it had begun. The jet bridge was empty now, lights dimmed, the carpet bearing faint marks where countless feet had passed. He stood there, hands in his coat pockets, listening to the building breathe. He thought of the mural, of the words painted by people who believed them. He thought of how easily those words were ignored when convenience beckoned. He felt anger then, controlled, focused, useful. His phone buzzed. Holt's name. "We have confirmation," she said. "Independent source. The name checks out." James closed his eyes. "Then we proceed." "We'll need you," Holt added. "On record." James hesitated. "You know what that costs." "I do." "So do I," James said. "I'm in." When he hung up, he felt the weight settle fully now. Not the weight of fear, the weight of consequence. He straightened, shoulders squaring, the years of service aligning behind him like a spine. As he walked away from the jet bridge, James knew the story would change soon. It would no longer be about a man dragged off a plane. It would be about why that had been possible at all. And somewhere, in offices far from airports, men who had never expected their names to be spoken aloud began to feel a pressure they couldn't quite explain. James Carter stepped into the night, unseen again, exactly where he did his best work, ready to finish what inconvenience had started. The arrests didn't happen with sirens or cameras. They happened with doors closing quietly and phones going unanswered. James Carter stood in a federal conference room as morning light slid across polished wood, watching men who had once filled stages now study their hands like strangers. Titles were read, rights were stated. Faces that had never imagined consequence finally met it. No shouting, no speeches, just the dull, irreversible sound of gravity returning to the room. Rebecca Holt moved with practiced calm, directing agents, sealing files, ensuring nothing leaked before it needed to. Alan Reeves stood beside James, reading confirmations as they came in. The consultancy's accounts were frozen, travel privileges revoked, vendor contracts suspended pending review. A system that had relied on invisibility was being forced into daylight, one mechanism at a time. James felt no triumph, only relief, tempered by the knowledge that relief was temporary and vigilance was permanent. Margaret Collins was brought in last. Not defiant now, not theatrical. She looked smaller, diminished by fluorescent light and the absence of leverage. She avoided James's eyes as she was seated, counsel whispering urgently at her side. When the formalities were complete, Holt nodded to James. He approached, not to gloat, not to threaten, but to finish a conversation that had begun on a jet bridge. "You did your job," James said quietly. "You moved things efficiently. You hid behind comfort and routine. You forgot that patterns don't disappear. They accumulate." Margaret swallowed. "They'll replace me." "Eventually," James said, "but not with you still in the way." Her shoulders sagged. The fight had left her. She signed where indicated, initialed where told. When it was done, she was escorted out without ceremony. The door closed. The room breathed again. By afternoon, statements were prepared. Carefully, precisely. No adjectives, no dramatics. Facts only. The story would find its way out later, filtered through outlets and opinions, but the record would be clean. James insisted on it. The work deserved that respect. He returned to the airport once more, not as an investigator, but as a man finishing a chapter. The terminal hummed with its familiar chaos. Families hugged, Travelers argued softly with gate agents. Coffee spilled. Announcements echoed. Life in motion. James paused near the mural he'd noticed before, the one about freedom and vigilance. He stood there long enough for passers-by to glance and move on, unaware that the quiet man in the worn coat had shifted something beneath their feet. Luke Hanley approached, uniform pressed, eyes steadier than before. "Sir," he said, "I wanted to say, I transferred out of field security, oversight division, training." James nodded. "Good. I won't forget," Luke added. James met his gaze. "Make sure others remember." Dana Whitcomb watched from a distance, then came forward. "I resigned," she said. "No pride, no shame, just honesty. I mistook order for integrity." James inclined his head. "You noticed. That matters." She exhaled, lighter than she'd looked the night before. "Thank you." He watched her go, hoping the institution would be better for the cracks it had been forced to acknowledge. Institutions didn't change because they were shamed. They changed because someone refused to look away. His flight boarded without incident. A window seat this time. The cabin settled. The engines spooled. As the plane lifted, James closed his eyes and let the hum steady his breathing. He thought of the years ahead, the quieter days, the distance from rooms like the one he'd just left. He welcomed it without illusion. Rest wasn't the same as forgetting. When the plane leveled, a flight attendant stopped by, young, careful, eyes searching for reassurance. "Would you like anything?" she said. James smiled, gentle and real. "A ginger ale, please." She smiled back, relieved, and moved on. The aisle filled with small, ordinary sounds, the kind that meant things were working the way they should. Later, as clouds rolled beneath the wing, James considered the arc of it all. How quickly dignity could be stripped by assumption. How easily power hid behind procedure. How fragile trust became when convenience replaced curiosity. He didn't think of himself as a hero. He thought of himself as a witness who had refused to step aside. When the plane touched down, James stood with the others, patient, unremarkable, exactly as he preferred. Outside, the world waited, imperfect and unfinished. He stepped into it, knowing that justice rarely announced itself, and never arrived alone. It came because someone endured the cost of being inconvenient at the right moment. If this story stayed with you, take a second to like and subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments by writing 3 words in English. Tell your story.